During COVID, the central banks around the world used the artificially created wealth effect to boost their economies. It is actually incredible how many people fell for this government-sponsored scam, but so many did, and no doubt in times of crisis they will again. Central bank examples are the US Federal Reserve, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of Canada, and the Bank of England, and there's many more than this. Central banks create the wealth effect by substantially dropping interest rates and printing money. This boosts the money flowing around the economy, and even though it's all just borrowed money, it still makes the economy pump and keeps businesses afloat. The creation of the wealth effect has winners and it has losers. Like everything that the central banks do, the winners are always the people who have the most to start with. Central banks have one big lever that they turn to in an emergency, which enables them to choose whether to enrich asset holders a bit or enrich asset holders a lot, and mostly they go for a lot. There are many people involved in this wealth effect scam, and they can be split into many groups, but I will just look at 4 main distinct groups in this video. You have Group 1, which consists of people who are lured into the trap set by the reserve banks who have never had the opportunity to own their own home before. The central banks, like a spider spinning a web, slash interest rates to near zero, and even in some particularly distasteful examples, slash loan-to-value restrictions, meaning that they will allow borrowers to borrow 100% of the home loan without even needing a deposit. This is particularly cruel, as it is designed to entice the most vulnerable of borrowers, and only the most cruel central banks would do this, like the RBNZ. This group of people suddenly see a way out of the rental trap. The artificially low interest rates means the calculation that the banks use to determine how much somebody can borrow finally allows these people to borrow more, which means that they can finally afford their own home. Unfortunately though, this calculation also means that the other group can also borrow more. This group I should call Group 2, the property investor wannabes. These people already have a roof over their own heads, but they see this crazy time as their golden ticket to become new landlords, or in some instances multiple property owning landlords, essentially buying up several properties. It is this group who the Reserve Bank is targeting the most. They use this group's natural greed to entice them into the trap, and it always works. The central banks now have their main victims in place, who they can manipulate and play with to achieve their end goal of saving the economy and the asset holders. Unfortunately for the first group, they are simply collateral damage to the central banks. They can be chewed up and spat out with absolutely no regard for their welfare. They are not already rich, so their welfare is simply irrelevant to the central banks. Because you now have 2 groups of people who are suddenly trying to buy houses all of a sudden, this increased demand fighting for limited supply means the house prices rise, and in some cases rise substantially. It is a real shame that people just want a roof over their heads in Group 1 get caught up in this disaster. It really is. The greed of the second group is everything that is wrong with modern society. This group is happy to destroy the country just to get ahead. They just want to get ahead of other people. I sometimes wonder how these people can sleep at night after outbidding a first home buyer family who was just desperately wanting to escape the very rental trap that these investors want to get more people trapped into. How the central bank governors can sleep at night too is beyond me. They are creating this cruel and unfair practice for their own benefit. Fair enough that they are punishing the greedy fools in Group 2, but ruining the lives of so many in Group 1 and treating them as just collateral damage is abhorrent. Especially when you think about who are the beneficiaries from this central bank manipulation. The people who already have stuff. The asset holders. These people can also be split into 2 groups. I'll call them Group 3 and Group 4. These are the reason that Groups 1 and 2 are being played. These are the people who feel richer when Groups 1 and 2 push up property prices. These are the very people who are meant to feel this magical wealth effect. And just like the equally despicable trickle-down effect, the central bank set this whole plan up just so the asset holders feel wealthier when house prices start rising. So Group 3 consists mainly of people with one mortgaged home. They are not very rich and have only ever been able to afford a cheap second-hand car, say, and they definitely have never had enough money for luxuries like a boat. Then all of a sudden, because Group 1 and Group 2 are being played and are throwing money around like bandits, Group 3's house prices have now gone up $200,000 or $300,000 for absolutely no sane reason. It is all an artificially created illusion. It is a lottery win for Group 3 and 4 without even buying a ticket. But this makes Group 3, who are unfortunately also obviously not very financially savvy, fall into the trap. They see super low interest rates and they decide to use this new built up equity to buy that brand new car or brand new boat that they have always dreamed of. This is the reason why car sales and boat sales yards absolutely exploded during COVID. What could possibly go wrong, eh? Surely interest rates were only going to stay low forever, weren't they? Yeah, sure they were. Releasing this equity has to be one of the most foolish things anyone could do. But they do it over and over and over again, and still most of them have no idea what has just been done to them. Many will now have much higher debt levels and hugely extended terms on their mortgage, with only depreciating assets to show for it. Now we'll do a video on the folly of releasing equity later on. Now some of Group 3 will also have joined Group 1 and 2, and decided to use this newly created miracle built up equity to put down on an investment property, which further exacerbates the exploding house prices, which then creates a chain reaction. In some countries like New Zealand and Australia, this became a nuclear-sized chain reaction which got completely out of control, causing a melt-up in prices. Fortunately, due to a correctly sized interest rate hiking cycle, New Zealand prices look to be finally collapsing back down to earth, which is always part of the wealth effect scam, by the way, but Australia is another animal. It is a country hell-bent on allowing the melt-up to continue, at least till after the election, that is. They have no political party brave enough to accept what has to happen, and the RBA is just a lapdog that's obviously petrified of its masters in Parliament. It proved this to us all when it decided to not raise interest rates enough during record-breaking inflation, as it was in fear of upsetting the Ponzi. They decided to punish the poorest with high inflation just to save the richest once again. Now we get to the final group, Group 4, the luckiest group. These people own their assets outright and in some cases have large property portfolios already. The wealth effect makes these people feel much wealthier because they are much wealthier. Some of them will sell assets at overinflated prices, which then allows them to trickle a small bit of this wealth down onto the heads of us plebs by spending some of this free money they have been given on fancy meals out and luxury holidays if we're also lucky. They may also decide to buy an extra car or an extra boat, but many of them have already been blessed by such things, so it's not as tempting to these people. So this is, in a nutshell, the wealth effect, guys. And what do you think? Should the unelected and unaccountable central banks be allowed to manipulate the most vulnerable in society with the end goal of enriching the least vulnerable in society? Now, it's well known that central banks employ literal geniuses to work in a back office, and to see them coming up with different ways to manipulate the people who are least financially savvy for the bank's own benefit is really not good. It's not good at all. Do you think that we need to reassess what powers central banks should possess, if all they ever do time and time again is protect the rich? Have you ever wondered why they're unelected but have so much power? And very often after the governors do what they have done, they resign on an enormous pension, and then some other government plant takes the reins and gets ready for another rinse and repeat when the time comes. There's nobody held to account, there's nobody punished, there's just an ever-widening wealth gap and a rapidly growing dysfunctional society. I believe that it is time to change the system when the system is this morally defunct. If only we could educate the masses to not play the game anymore, to not fall for the wealth effect scam when these charlatans inevitably pull it out of their hats once again in the future. That would be the best outcome, you know. That would finally make governments stop relying on this debt-induced fakery and finally get back to creating real wealth, which they could do by boosting the economy through more productive means, like, I don't know, maybe like building things that the rest of the world wants, or boosting our waning productivity. All countries at this point need to completely dismantle their Ponzi's, as it is becoming an out-of-control monster that governments are becoming too reliant on. Why did it have to become too hard for people to just have a house as a home? It's just not right. Anyhow guys, please like and subscribe if this video was any good, and maybe even consider sharing it. The more people who eventually can see what is being intentionally done to them, the better. And you never know, if more people see the light, it may make them put pressure on the governments to stop the central banks from using this cruel practice anymore. But if it even gets just one person from Group 1 to not get drawn into this wealth effect trap, then it's job done in my eyes. So see you next time, people, and thanks for watching. Cheers.